This episode of Spectre Sound Studios is brought to you by Lewitt Microphones. Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to the History of Recording, the series where we look back on the many events and developments that shaped the world of audio engineering. Last time, we took a look at the inception of recording technology, the phonograph, the gramophone, wax cylinders, and the many great minds behind those inventions. Let's continue the story and talk about the next big development in recording tech, microphones. Now, we've all used or at least seen a microphone before, but how the hell do they work? Now, to keep things simple for all the musicians and bass players, a microphone is a device that captures sound waves and vibrations through a diaphragm and converts that energy into an electric signal. That signal can then be captured by whatever the microphone is plugged into, like the preamps on an audio recording interface. Now, because the human voice can only get so loud, a need arose to increase the volume when speaking to large crowds. The earliest devices used to achieve this were primitive acoustic megaphones, the first examples of which can be found on Greek theater masks with horn-shaped mouth openings. You can even try this yourself by rolling up some paperboard so it has a smaller hole on one end and a larger hole on the other. This increases the acoustic impedance seen by the vocal cords, matching them to the air, thus creating a more powerful and directional sound wave. And if you're an old man like me, you've probably seen one of these in a Looney Tunes sketch. This is called the lover's telephone, a non-electric device made from 2 tin cans and a wire. How it works is when one person speaks into the can, the sound travels as vibrations down the wire and comes out the other can as sound again. Science, kids! It's not just some weird conspiracy. But what really kickstarted the development of microphones as we know them today was the invention of the carbon microphone, developed in 1870 by David Edward Hughes in England, as well as Emil Berliner and Thomas Edison in the United States. These were made with 2 metal plates that were separated by small particles of carbon. Voltage was run through the metal plates, which caused a small current to flow through the carbon. One of the metal plates was made to be very thin and act as the microphone's diaphragm. When sound waves hit the diaphragm, they made it vibrate, and the difference in amplitude and the varying pressure on the carbon granules charged the electrical resistance between the metal plates, creating an electrical signal. After a long legal dispute in 1877, Edison was awarded the first patent for the carbon microphone, and later on in 1886, he refined the design into the carbon button transmitter. Now, one of the big problems with these was that they didn't capture a very wide frequency range. And kind of like your drummer at band practice, they created a lot of noise. And they sounded a little bit something like this. The carbon button wasn't exactly the most accurate microphone, but it worked well enough to transmit human speech. Regardless, they were the first of their kind, and they paved the way for the creation of the telephone. You might have seen a picture like this before. People sitting in front of a massive patch bay, shifting cables from one hole to another. Basically, they were connecting the electric signal from the microphone to the speaker between 2 telephones. The carbon mic was also used in 1910 in the first ever radio broadcast, which was a performance at the New York Metropolitan Opera House. The radio itself would go on to revolutionize the music industry, and honestly, it deserves an episode of its own. So for right now, let's get back to microphones. The next major breakthrough in microphone design came in 1916 when Western Electric's Edward Christopher Wente developed the condenser microphone. Now, here's something you may not know about condenser microphones. As it turns out, these mics are also called capacitor mics, as capacitors were historically called condensers. And in the UK, I believe they're still called condensers. With these microphones, the diaphragm actually acts as one of the plates of the capacitor, and the vibrations of sound produce changes in the distance between the plates. But in order to work, they needed an external power source, which came in the form of a small battery, or what we have today, which is 48 volts of phantom power. Condenser mics are far and many, from the cheap karaoke mics to the high-end precise recording mics. Their inherited advantage is that since they're powered externally, they can reproduce very high fidelity sound. Unlike dynamic or ribbon microphones where the sound wave does the bulk of the work, condenser microphones don't require the source they're recording to be very loud, and they capture a far broader and more detailed image of whatever is blasting air at them.
Crazy! I'm crazy! The feeling so lonely!
This This is also why you've never ever seen one of these on stage at a metal show, as the same technology also makes them far more susceptible to feedback. Okay guys, real quick, this episode of The History of Recording is brought to you by Lewitt Microphones. Now, I've been a giant fan of Lewitt for several years. They build mics that can fit any budget, from the entry-level 240 Pro to the 440 Pure to the brand new flagship 1042. I demoed it recently on the show and it absolutely blew me away on every source I could throw at it. Not only can you control the polar patterns remotely from your desktop, you can also choose between tube and FET modes, as well as blend them to taste. It's truly a modern mic for the 21st century recording studio, and you can get it at a price that isn't out of reach. I've also got a full demo on this channel that I'd highly recommend checking out. Lewitt also makes a wide variety of dynamic microphones and an absolutely killer set of drum microphones that have never let me down. For everyone out there starting out wondering, what mic should I get? Take a look at Lewitt, because no matter your price point, they've got something that's going to fit your needs. And what's more is, if you watch to the end of the video, I'm going to have details on how you can win a 640 TS mic, the microphone where you can change the polar pattern after the signal's been recorded. Now back to the show. The first dynamic microphone was actually patented in 1874 by a man named Ernst Siemens, but it never caught any traction as carbon mics were adequate for telephone applications and were easier to produce. In 1928, EC worked with Albert Turris to develop the first commercial dynamic microphone, which would be released in 1931 under the name Western Electric 618A Electrodynamic Transmitter, a name so long that even Ibanez guitars would have a hard time saying it out loud. Because of its ease of use and tough, compact housing, it remained in use for many years among PA, film, and broadcast workers. It was also the mic Franklin D. Roosevelt used during his famous fireside chat radio addresses. These microphones function on the same principle as a loudspeaker, but in reverse. A small, movable induction coil positioned in a magnetic field is attached to a diaphragm. When sound waves hit that diaphragm, it causes the coil to vibrate in the magnetic field, producing varying current through electromagnetic induction. Unlike condenser mics, a dynamic mic's membrane doesn't respond to the same to all the frequencies, so some microphones use multiple membranes to capture multiple parts of the sound spectrum and combine the resulting signals into the sound profile of that particular microphone. On the other hand, some dynamic mics are specifically designed to capture a certain portion of the sound spectrum more than others. Take the Onyx D6, for example, a very popular kick drum mic that's pre-EQ'd to get you a great results right off the bat by capturing more low-end thump and high-end click while scooping out the unnecessary mids. In 1965 and 66, Shure Incorporated released the SM57 and SM58 respectively, which would go on to become some of the most iconic mics in history, and they're still used to this day in both the studio and at live shows. They're also the most common victim of the room temperature IQ know-it-alls known as mic cuppers. The two microphones not only had excellent off-axis rejection, but they also had a very natural sound signature, albeit with a slight presence boost. This made them ideal for recording because it cut down on the bleed from the other instruments, but also helped what was being recorded to cut through a dense mix. They soon became staples in the world of live shows, which were growing even more popular and ever larger at the time of their release. The last of the major microphone types, the ribbon mic, was developed around 1920 by Walter H. Schottky and Erwin Gerlach. This was a big game changer at the time because their frequency response was much broader than early condenser designs. Ribbon mics are typically made using a thin conductive aluminum diaphragm that is placed between two permanent magnets. Incoming sound is then converted into an electric signal via electromagnetic induction. And due to this design, ribbons are almost always bidirectional, meaning that they pick up sound both at the front and at the back of the microphone. Ribbons are also known for their darker signature and very smooth top end, which is why they're used in studios all over the world, this one included. They help tame the sound of some of the harsher frequencies of stringed instruments like violins, but they can also give quite a bit of warmth and depth to just about anything. Ribbons have been made by a load of different companies. Schottky's and Gerlach's mics went through several different revisions in the 1930s. Bear Dynamic introduced the M160 in 1957, but the most famous name that's associated with ribbon mics of the modern age has to be Royer. David Royer designed his first ribbon in 1997, the famous R121. They used top-of-the-line neodymium magnets to produce a much stronger magnetic field than the typical Alnicos most ribbons used at the time. Royer also integrated output transformers into the mic to create a better signal-to-noise ratio. Now, one can't do a piece on the history of microphones without mentioning the most famous brand in the field, Neumann. Neumann was founded in 1928 in Berlin, Germany by the company's then namesake, George Neumann. Their first product was the CMV3, the world's first commercially available condenser microphone. It was pretty big, like over a foot tall and about 4 inches in diameter. That's about as big as a 2-liter Coke bottle. And due to its shape and size, it was commonly referred to as the Neumann bottle. And you can see it in pictures with the world's most famous megalomaniac, Adolf Hitler. In 1943, Neumann's factory in Berlin was damaged by the Allies during the fire bombings. Neumann relocated his company to the small town of Gethel, which after the war fell under Soviet control and it became a publicly owned operation. George Neumann re-established his own company as George Neumann GmbH in one of the Allied sectors of Berlin, and in 1949 began producing the now famous U47 tube condenser microphone. The mic gained widespread acceptance in the recording industry, and it established Neumann as the name of quality in the business. Neumann would go on to create many microphones throughout their history, one of which I actually have. This is a vintage U87 and it sounds absolutely beautiful. I bought this as a present of myself for quitting smoking, but to be honest, I also bought it because I believed the brand name would attract clients to my studio. As of 2022, microphones are cheaper than ever. Mass production and the assembly line have allowed manufacturers to create some very inexpensive microphones that sound absolutely spectacular. Sure, you can buy a vintage U87, but ask yourself this: do you actually need one? Is it worth dropping that much money on a mic when the modern offerings are going to give you on-par results at like 1/10 the price? Besides the Neumann, I also have a Lewitt 240 Pro and 440 Pure, both of which cost significantly less than the U87, but deliver favorable results and don't leave anything to be desired. In fact, ever since I got the flagship 1040 Pro, I'm thinking about selling the U87 because I just don't see the point of it anymore. That's the great thing about the modern day recording industry. You don't have to invest a ton of money to get great recordings. And as the history goes on, one can only wonder what's going to come down the pipeline next. Now, speaking of cutting edge technology, I've teamed up with Lewitt to put a 640 TS up for grabs. It has 2 outputs, so you can manipulate the polar pattern in your DAW after you've recorded your tracks. These things are killer on metal guitars, acoustics, vocals, you name it. Follow the link in the description below to sign up and you just might win yourself this amazing microphone. I guarantee whoever wins it is gonna love it. All right, that's it for this episode of the History of Recording, so please subscribe so you get notified for the next one. And until then, stay metal, my friends. Fuck. Try this again. Oh shit, let's get back to the beginning. Fuck. Incoming sound is then converted into an electric signal via itchy fucking nose. Yeah. I guarantee. Yeah.